Hello everyone, today I'm going to build a small project by using React, Typescript, Emotion for styling, and Chart.js. We're going to fetch data from the server, and then we will display COVID-19 data for each country, and when the user clicks on country, the country will be displayed in the chart, so you can easily compare them. By clicking again on the selected countries, you will exclude them from the chart. I will create a project by using create React app, and I will add template Typescript. Now I will change directory to the project folder, and I will open it in the Visual Studio Code. I will open the app component and I will start the project by running npm run start command. This is how our project template looks in the browser. And I will change the app function to the arrow function. This is just a personal preference. You can keep a regular function if you want, but I tend to use more ES6 syntax. And I will add a type annotation to this component, and it will be React function component. We could also remove import React because it is already configured with create React app. I will also remove CSS and CSS files because we are going to introduce emotion styling. And we can also remove HTML code from the app component and the logo SVG icon. So now we have a clear template. I will create a header element in order to have something displayed in the browser. And I will search for the COVID-19 API, which is this one. Here is the documentation. And here is the endpoint that we are going to use. We are going to fetch the data from the summary endpoint. So I will create a method that will fetch the data, and I will name it fetch data. And inside it, I will call fetch method with the endpoint as an argument. The fetch method will return a promise, so I will just put await keyword in front of it and async in front of the fetch data function. And I will store the value in the result variable. And then I will have another promise from result.json, and that will be the actual data which will be stored in the data variable. Now I would like to create a component state where I will store this data, and I will call it data and set data method. So I will use state hook for that, and the initial value will be undefined. And when the data is fetched from the server, I will just call setData method with the data as an argument. And now it's time to call this fetchData when the component is rendered, and I will call it inside the useEffect callback, and the component state will be updated on each render. And I will just put a console log to check that everything works fine. So here is the response from the server. It is an object with some different properties like countries, date, global, ID, and message. And inside the countries we have an array of objects with different properties as well. And I would like to create a type for this response object, which will make our code more predictable. Above the function component, I will create a new type, response data, and it will contain a property countries. So here is a country object. So I will create also a type country, which should contain all of these properties. And I will just copy and paste them in order to easily define type for each property. First property country is a string type. Then we have a country code, which is also a string. Then we have a date. So it is also a string, but don't get confused because Typescript has a date type when you call new date. Then we have the ID, which is also a string. And now we have some number types: new confirmed, new that's, new recovered. Premium is an empty object, so I'm not sure what type should it be. I will check in the response. So in each country, the premium is an empty object, so I will just set unknown type for now. And it is always better to set unknown instead of any. The slug will be string type, total confirmed will be number, total that's should be number, and total recovered should be number. Then a country's property will be array of country type. Then we have a date property with a type string. And we have a global, which should be another type. So I will just copy these properties here. And I will create a global type above the response data type. So date property will have a type of string, and new confirmed will be a number, and yeah, all other properties will have a type number. Total confirmed, total that's, and total recovered. Now I can remove this part from the code. And the global property will have a type of global data. And next property will be ID, which will have a type of string, and message, which will also have a type string. Now that we created a type for the response from the server, I will just add a type annotation for the data variable. And now you will see that the set data will have a warning. So we would need to update the type of the data state, which will be either response data type or undefined. We don't have any warning now, and everything looks fine in the browser. Now let's create some components, and I will create a components folder for that. And the first component will be GlobalInfo component, where I will place a global data about COVID-19. And this component will return div element with the h1 element inside. And let's create other heading elements. First one will be for new confirmed cases. And I will add a property new confirmed. And another heading element will be, let me check the global data type. So we can show new deaths. And it will also have this property. And the last heading will be new recovered. I'm going to export this component as a default, and I will also need to create a new recovered property. We have a TypeScript warning which says that our properties have the type of any. I'm going to create a props interface where I'm going to define a type for each property. So new confirmed will be a number, new deaths will be a number, and new recovered will be also a number. And the GlobalInfo variable will be a function component with these props. In the app component, I will replace h1 element with the GlobalInfo component, and you will see a warning from TypeScript that I should add 3 parameters. So I will add new confirmed, which will be from data state, from the global property, and then I will add new deaths, which will be also from the global property of data state, and the new recovered, which will be again from the global property of the data state. We have another warning from TypeScript which says that the data state can be undefined, so I will just check if the data is not undefined, and if it is undefined I will just render loading. So everything works fine, and I would like to format these numbers, so I will use the intl object with the number format method, and I will just pass the number as an argument, and I will also do the same for other metrics. So these global numbers are formatted, and let's see what happens if we change a type of new confirmed to string. We will have a TypeScript error which says that a string cannot be passed to the format method. So you can see that a lot of potential bugs are prevented in the development phase. Now I want to create a new component where I'm going to display the list of countries, and it will just return the empty template for now, and I will also add export default. And we would also need to add props to the country list component. We should have an array of items with the type country, so I will name it countries, and country list should be a function component, so I will put type annotation for that, and you can also use the shorter version, which is FC. And I will create the interface props, which will contain countries as a property. I will need to import this country type, and since we are going to use these types on many places, I will just create another file for that, and I will copy all of these types and put export keyword in front of each one. So now I can just import them from the types file, and it will be easier to reuse them. And I will do the same for the country list component. I will import the country type from types, and the props will contain countries property, which will be an array of items with type country. Now I can iterate through the list of the countries, and for each country I would like to render li item with the name of the country, which is in the country property. Maybe it's a little bit confusing to have country.country, but yeah, that's just the response from the server. I will add country list component into the app component, and I will add a fragment that will wrap GlobalInfo and country list components. And the Typescript complains about the property, so I would need to add countries, and it will be countries property from the data state. Okay, I also forgot to add a key for the country iteration, so the key will be the ID from the country. So now when I refresh the page, everything works fine, and we have a list of countries. Now it's time to style our content, so I will add emotion to our project, and I would like to use a styled component approach, so I will install these two modules. And now we are ready for styling our template, so I will start with UL element. And let's check what should be changed first. So we should set padding to 0, and I will just import styled module, and I will create list wrapper component, which will be a styled component, and it will be the unordered list element. So I will specify styles here. I will set padding to 0, and instead of UL I will just replace it with list wrapper element. And if you check in the browser, you will see that we have a padding of 0 for the UL element. I would also like to display countries side by side, so I will set display to flex. Now we should also add some styles to the li element. So I will create a component for that with a name list item, and it will be li element with the list style type set to none, because I don't want to have this small circle in front of each item. And I will also add flex and set it to 50%. It will just set the size of the list item to the 50% of available horizontal space. One more thing that we should add, it is a flex wrap property with the wrap value. So now the countries will go into the new line. If you are not familiar with Flexbox or you want to learn more about it, I have a video about building responsive layouts by using Flexbox, so you can check it out. I would like to have 3 items in a row instead of 2, and only for the screen sizes which is greater than 420 pixels. So I will use a media query, and yeah, it works fine. We could also align text to center. And I would also like to add some more data about each country. So I will create a div wrapper element which will contain all the data for the country. I will wrap the country name with the h4 tag. And for other metrics, I will use just a div. So first metric will be new confirmed. So now when I type country, I will have suggestions for properties. The next one will be new that's. And the last one will be new recovered. We could also style a little bit the inner content of the list item element. So we can add some background color. I will first create a list content styled component. And I will add a background color property. And I will set the value to this one. It just came to my mind, so let's see how it looks. I can barely notice the difference between this color and the white background. So I will use a color picker from the browser in order to pick some darker color. So this one looks fine. And I will also add a margin in order to make some space between each country. And the content of the list item is touching the borders, so I will also add a padding. So it is better now. And now I would like to add some styles to the body element. And in order to do that, I will use a special component from Emotion, which is the global component. And with this component, we can actually provide a global CSS as a property. So we would also need to import CSS. And now I will provide styles property with the CSS for body, and it will have a background color of, let's just put white for now, and in the browser I will pick another color. This one looks fine. And I would also like to change the color of the text. So I will just put black color and I will change it in the browser. So this one looks fine. So I'm happy with the combination of the colors, and now I would like to center this text of the GlobalInfo component. So I will create a styled component which will wrap the heading elements. I will name it wrapper and it will be a div element, and it will just have a text align property with the value center. I will replace the div element with the wrapper component, and it looks much better. Now I would like to add another feature, and that would be to allow users to select certain countries so they can compare data for each one of them. And we will also create a chart where the data will be displayed. And before that, let's just store that data in the component state. And the state name will be active countries with the method setActiveCountries. And the default value will be an empty string, and the type of this state will be an array of country items. Now when the user clicks on the list item, I would like to add that country to the array of active countries. But before that, I would also like to add cursor pointer, which will indicate that this block is clickable. And I will add onClick event, which should trigger on item click property, which is a callback function passed from the app component. It will have a country as an argument, and we should also define a type for onItemClick function. So it will be just a void function with a parameter of type country. And now Typescript is saying that we need to provide this onItemClick function. So I will just create one. I will name it handle on country click. Maybe we could leave it with a name on country click because it is shorter. So I will pass it as a callback function to the country list component, and it will have a country parameter. And now I will update the state of the active countries, and I will call setActiveCountries method. And I will create a new array with the items from the active countries, and I will append the new country. And I will just render the list of active countries in order to make sure that everything works fine. So I will just display a span element with the country name for each active country. Now let's check what happens when we click on some countries. You will see that the list is being updated. But if we click on the same country over and over again, we will just have some duplicates. So I would like to change that and to remove the country which is already added to the list, so the user will be able to toggle between adding and removing the country. First thing would be to check if the country exists in the active countries array. So I will use findIndexArray method, and I will search for the country with the ID from the argument. And I will store the index value into the variable with a name country index. Now I will check if the country index value is greater than -1, and that would mean that the country is already added to the active countries array. Otherwise, I would just need to add the new country to the array, which I already did. And if the country exists in the array, I will just remove it by the country index value. I will create a new array from the active countries state, and then I will remove the country by using splice method, and it will just remove the country from the new active countries array, and then I will set active countries to the new active countries. Let's try it out in the browser. So when I click on some countries, it will add it to the list, but when I click again, it will just remove it. And we can remove these active countries from the components template. Now I would like to mark somehow the list item of the countries that have been added to the list of active countries. I will create a new component, country item, and I will move list item and all of its content there. Country item will be a function component which should return this template, and I will also add export to default for this module. And now I would need to also add styled components from the country list component. And I forgot to add a return statement for this component. And I would also need to import styled module from emotion/styled. So now I can add a country item component into the country list template. And I will pass a country as a property. And I would need to create a props interface for the country item component. So country property will be of type country from the types file. So this function will not return any value, so it will just be a void function with a parameter of type country. Now when the user clicks on the list item, I would like to mark it somehow as I mentioned, and I will use a component state for that. So I will create isActiveState, which will have a default value of false, and it will have a type of boolean. And when the user clicks on this element, I will just toggle between true and false. I will create handle on click method, which will have a country as a parameter, and it will be a type of country, of course. And now I will also call on item click callback from the parent component, and also set is active, which will be the opposite value of the is active state. So it will basically mean that this country is a part of the active countries array. So I will pass is active value to the list content component, and I will create a props interface for the list content component. So I will name it list content props, and it will just have a property is active, which will be a boolean. So we specified props for the list content component, and now I can access this is active prop, so I can apply different background color for the active state. And if is active is true, I will just set this color. I have no idea how it looks, so I will check it in the browser. But we have an error in the country list component, so let's check it. Okay, we forgot to pass on item click callback function, and it should work fine. So now when I click on the country, it should change the background, but maybe we can change it to white color, because it will be more visible. Yeah, it's better now. And now we are ready to introduce Chart.js. So the idea is to use data of active countries and display it in the bar chart. So I will search for React Chart.js library, and I'm going to install it in my project. And while it's being installed, we can check documentation and some examples that we can use. We are going to need vertical bar chart, and this is a great example. I will go into source code, and let's check the installation. The installation is done, and I will create a new component where I'm going to import bar chart from the Chart.js library, and also some code snippets from the chart example. So this component will be a function component that should have countries as a property, and it should return, we can actually leave the properties for later. So the component should return a bar component from the Chart.js library, as in this example. So we're going to need data and options. So I will just copy it from here. And I also need to import bar from React Chart.js. And now our component should be ready. I have an error. Let's also add export default. And the error says that we need to add a type property, and I'm not sure why is this property mandatory since we imported the bar component, but I think it should work fine with this workaround. Now let's include the bar chart component into the app component and see how it looks. So I will add horizontal line between the GlobalInfo and the bar chart. And let's refresh the page. and we have a chart. So it's a really huge one. And yeah, we have data when we hover the bars. So I would like to make this chart smaller, and I will create a styled component which will be a wrapper for the bar component. I will name it chart wrapper, and I will include styled module from emotion, and it will be a div element. And now I can set max width to 700 pixels, and I could also add some margins in order to center it. And I will just wrap the bar component now. And now let's check in the browser. It looks much better. Now it's time to replace chart data with data from the countries. And now I can include countries property into this component. And I will also create props interface in order to specify types of components props. So countries will be an array of items with a type country. And we can also pass it to function component. And now that we have our countries, we can actually create a function that will generate this data and labels as well. So let's create that function. I will name it generate chart data. And first I will create a variable data that will be just an empty array, and labels that will also be an empty array. Labels will be an array of type string, and data will be an array of type number. So now I can iterate through countries, and for each country I will just populate data with the new confirmed property from the country item. And for the labels variable, I will just use country property from the country item, which is a country name. Now we can return data structure that is needed for the chart. But instead of these hard-coded labels, we will just pass labels that we generated, and I will do the same for data. And we could also change the label property, since we're going to display new confirmed data for each country. Now Typescript alerts us that we should provide countries property for the bar chart component. So I will pass active countries as countries property. And we still have this hard-coded data, and we would also need to hide the bar chart when the active countries array is empty. But first, let's fix this data problem. So for the data property, I will pass generate chart data function, and I will call it. And I can also remove this data example. So now when I refresh the page, I would also like to remove this global label. And we can specify that inside the options object. So inside the plugins property, there is a legend property, and inside that you can specify display to false. And inside the app components template, I will check for the length of active countries array, and if it's not empty, I will display bar chart. Otherwise, nothing will be displayed. I will select some countries with new confirmed data so we can compare them. There are a lot of countries with 0 for new confirmed data. I'm not sure if it's true. We can check our selection in the chart and compare data of each country. And if we click again on the same countries, they should be excluded from the chart. One thing that I found as a possible improvement is that we can import chart data type and specify a return type of the generate chart data function. So now if I, for example, change the return value as an empty object, I will get an error from Typescript. Thank you for watching this video. If you find it useful, please share it and subscribe to my channel.